Welcome to this weekend drive edition of Daily Drive for the first week in June 2024. I'm Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News in Detroit.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today we're breaking down some of the biggest stories in the auto industry from the past week and looking forward to what's in store in the days ahead. On the show today, automotive executives and policymakers had a lot of conversations about Chinese competition and supplier challenges on Mackinac Island, Michigan this week. We'll get a recap from our own Jake Neer and Crane's Detroit business reporter, Kurt Nagel.
People are finally starting to publicly acknowledge and recognize that, oh man, this is a real existential threat.
That's coming up in a few minutes, but first, Jamie, how you doing?
Good. Welcome to June.
Yes. June is here, and let's get into some news. So, Jamie, first, what's going on over at Stellantis? There's been quite a few senior executives that have departed in recent weeks. Is this Stellantis shuffling its ranks to dial in the business as a whole? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, Carlos Tavares has been very successful. Stellantis has made a lot of money, but they've had some disappointments here in North America and with the key brands that still really drive most of the profitability for the company, Ram and Jeep. We've seen sales slumps from both. Ram was the only full-size pickup that whose sales fell last year in the U.S. Jeep's been on a long slide. So it's not totally surprising. I mean, it's not entirely clear, right? It's not like suddenly they had big losses and Tavares said, okay, we're cleaning house. We're going to change these positions. We're going to fix this operation. It's more, some people retired, some people moved to other jobs that could have been already in the works. It's kind of hard to tell, but you look at it overall, right? New COO in North America, new head of sales for the US, new head of Ram, new head of Jeep. It's a lot of change at the top of that company. Maybe that's what they need. Maybe that's what's going on. It seems like there are other, shifts. And I think it's just that Tavares' relentless process of looking for ways to improve, cut costs, improve performance. He's a very demanding man.
Well, Jamie, in some more Stellantis news, this was very odd to me. I don't know about you. You know more about this industry than I do, but why would UAW President Sean Fain demote Rich Boyer after leading the Stellantis department to record contracts? It seems like he did his job.
Yeah, well, he did his job. They did that job together very much so. But, he did the job on the contract. The problem has been the follow through, right? You look at, they got the big wage gains and they got especially, a big jump for the workers at the parts depots, getting them all the way to, top tier pay. Well, now Stellantis has been, cutting things back. They've been trying to save jobs. They've been cutting hundreds of jobs here, a few hundred jobs there. And I think it's not actually playing out the way Sean Fain and the UAW leadership wanted it to. And maybe it's that he's blaming Boyer for allowing Stellantis to make these moves. Maybe he thinks they should be causing more trouble. It's hard to tell in the details, but it does seem like, along with the disruption that we saw in the executive ranks, some of that's trickling down through the manufacturing, and maybe Sean is blaming Boyer for it.
And Sean Fain is going to be taking over this while Rich Boyer is being demoted. So do you think that, or does this have anything to do possibly with Sean Fain's personal beef with Stellantis?
Well, you're not wrong about the strong feelings there, the long history. That definitely is a problem. Both. I mean, he came up through Stellantis, but of course, a lot of the corruption at the UAW was tied to relations with the predecessor of Stellantis, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles. So there are some hard feelings there, at least some deep personal feelings. That, as I said, the disappointment in some of the way things have played out might strike harder for him. But it seems to me like, a really unfortunate time for him to be having to take so much energy on fighting these Stellantis skirmishes or just leading that department when, a really big priority is this unionization push across the non-union automakers. They won the big election at Volkswagen, but the key is to get a contract there and bring that home, get them actual, say and some flex down there. So it can't be ideal. And hopefully I would hope, I don't have any hopes. It's not my place to pick sides, but I would think he would try to find a replacement to run that division soon. It's a big and important one.
Gotcha. And in some Nissan news, because I've always just feel like for this last year, Nissan's been just trying to dig themselves out of a hole. Do you believe in Nissan America's Jeremy Papin's resolution to the company's issue of days supply? I mean, they're sitting, Jamie, on a lot of inventory. Will his resolutions, you think, move the metal?
I think it's there's two parts to it to me. There's the longer term or the medium term shift to more lower priced vehicles, probably a lot of hybrids and gas powered cars. We're talking about the Kicks and the Rogue and things like that. And that makes sense as stuff that should move at a faster pace. But it's also a lot of it, they can move the metal that they need to, but it's going to cost money. And that's a delicate dance, especially for Nissan, because if you dial back, 5-10 years ago, Carlos Ghosn was always pushing Nissan for more growth, more volume. They did a lot of things with incentives, especially, sort of this controversial method called stair-step incentives that gives I don't need to get into all details, but they did a lot of different incentives in a lot of different ways that led to some funky pricing and kind of eroded the brand. And they've been on this mission for especially the years since Ghosn left to preserve the brand and maybe sell fewer vehicles at higher prices and higher margins. Now they're looking for big growth, and I think the dealers are concerned. Hey, generally dealers love incentives. They love high volume. They want to sell as many cars as they can, but they don't want it to come at the expense of the long-term value of the brand, because they are huge investors in the brand. So that's a lot of the source of tension. I think they can move what they want, and they've got the right medium-term strategy, but digging out from under it and making sure they have the right plan, something that the market really will bear, that's the key.
Gotcha. Good stuff. Coming up, a conversation about all the automotive trends that had executives and lawmakers talking this week at the Mackinac Policy Conference. That's next on Weekend Drive.
Welcome back to Weekend Drive. I'm Jamie Butters with Kellen Walker. The Mackinac Policy Conference on Michigan's Mackinac Island is an annual gathering of business leaders and public officials hosted by the Detroit Regional Chamber. Each year, the historic Grand Hotel is packed with politicians and executives hoping to shape better policy to support business in Michigan. And of course, business in the Great Lakes state leans heavily automotive. Our executive producer, Jake Neer, spoke with Kurt Nagel, who covers Michigan automotive companies for our sibling publication, Crane's Detroit Business. They talked about all of the trend lines they heard this week at the conference.
Kurt Nagel with Crane's Detroit Business. Welcome to Weekend Drive.
Thank you, Jake, for having me.
So, this has been a long week up here on Mackinac Island, as it always is for the Mackinac Policy Conference. But you're up here for Crane's Detroit Business, talking with a lot of the automotive folks and others who are here. And as I've said a couple times, we talk a lot about this conference in media as a political event, but it really is fundamentally a business event, and how the intersection of policy and business. When it comes to the automotive threads that are being pulled here, what are you hearing from people as you're interviewing suppliers and other people in that realm?
Yeah, I think two key themes have been China's emerging dominance on not only China and Europe and other parts of the world, but also potentially in North America. Their inevitable entry into the market, what that means for the Detroit 3 and the legacy automakers, and then obviously the ripple impacts for the suppliers. The other key theme is talent attraction and retention. That's particularly important for the automotive space, I think, for two reasons. One is, especially for suppliers, labor is hard to come by. Suppliers are still struggling to fill factories. That's been a recurring point over the week, talking with supplier executives. A lot of them are still looking to source more work to Mexico and cheaper labor countries. and just overall struggling to get workers on the line. And then the other component of that too is high-tech talent, where automakers are increasingly looking to the coast, particularly Silicon Valley, to develop that software-first talent that they say they can't readily tap in the Detroit market. So that is a big worry for the movers and the shakers here in this room this week, trying to figure out, well, how do we develop an ecosystem where talent comes to us and we retain our place in the automotive space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this conference specifically is so geared toward that, right? Because this is one of those situations where you can, if you're a supplier, you've got the ears of public officials and things like that to try to, encourage things that will help in that direction. And it's especially big now. I mean, I think every employer has been noticing this shortage of available workforce and has been trying to hire and has been having trouble filling positions in almost every sector. And now when you have something like the auto industry and suppliers, which is in transition, which has all these high-tech jobs, it probably makes it even harder to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And OEMs and suppliers alike are more heavily relying on automation, right? We're seeing these advanced robotics take over jobs that normally human beings would be doing, but it's not a bad thing in the sense that a lot of people don't want those jobs anymore. They don't want the manual labor, back-breaking work, especially if a robot can do it just as well. But at the same time, you need technicians and you need engineers and you need automation experts to be able to set up these lines, to be able to teach the robots how to do this work. So it all comes back to talent in a way.
Yeah. Are you hearing anything about what the suppliers specifically and other companies want to see happen from a policy side of things to try to get things moving? Has there been any specifics thrown out there this week?
There have been. I think at the federal level, certainly automotive executives are looking for more clarity in terms of who qualifies for CHIPS Act funding, for IRA funding, when that funding is going to come down the pike, because those are critical questions to a company's decision to make massive investments, right? They got to know what the government buy-in is before they, go full bore on these really mammothly expensive projects. So I think more clarity at the state level. I think there's a continued drumbeat of we want more funding to land large manufacturing projects. The SOAR funding is the marquee business attraction fund in the state of Michigan. Legislators are debating how to go about distributing that funding. There's been a lot of talk on making it more community focused, which is certainly good for locals and residents who are impacted by the project. On the industry side, that potentially creates complications in terms of what they have to do with the funding, the sort of local loopholes and requirements and obligations that they have to make, and the overall business environment in Michigan.
Sure. I know in the past that a big concern has been about developing sites, like the availability of green fields and what to do with brownfield sites. Is that still something that you hear, the suppliers and other businesses being concerned about in Michigan at this point, or has the state sort of turned a corner there?
Oh, it's big time a concern. There's still definitely a shortage of those large greenfield sites in Michigan. In the South, there's a lot more supply. So we've made progress in terms of investing heavily in infrastructure to kind of get up to speed. But yeah, we are nowhere near, I think, where we want to be. And there's certainly a push from folks in the business community and folks in the economic development community asking legislators for more billions of dollars to be able to, to get to a point where we're, competitive with the South and, able to develop these sites and land these big projects.
Sure. Going to China, which is one of the first things that you mentioned, and something that's come up in our conversations a lot this week. There was a whole panel during the Mich Auto Summit that happened, sort of the conference within a conference here at the Mackinac Policy Conference, that was all dedicated to China. Representative Debbie Dingell was on that panel with Michael Dunn, who's an expert in the Chinese auto industry. It comes up all the time. I think that it's one of those looming threats that's not here. We don't have very many Chinese imports in terms of vehicles yet, but it's really they're knocking on the door in so many ways. What are you hearing from people you're talking to about China and how concerned they are about that?
Yeah, I think the big thing I'm hearing is it's hitting home. People are finally starting to publicly acknowledge and recognize that, oh man, this is a real existential threat. Whereas maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, it was kind of the unspoken elephant in the room. Now, executives on the supply side, the OE side, are actually confronting the issue head on. So I think that's a bit of a silver lining in this whole conundrum, is that we recognize what's coming and we all agree on it, and now it's time to mobilize and tackle it head on.
Well, I think that's the thing that is, I don't know if lacking is the right word, but the thing that is the biggest question for me is that, yes, now there's the acknowledgement, but what can you actually do about this? I've asked, members of Congress just this week, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, she didn't have many specifics to give me about what she thinks should be done from a policy perspective. Just, we should look at our trade regulations, we should look at certain things, but at the end of the day, without violating international trade law and things like that, to me it seems like it's pretty limited in the policy prescriptions.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I'd certainly leave the specifics to the legislators. Tariffs obviously are keeping the proverbial enemy at bay for the time being. But really, I think, automakers and companies have to look within themselves and make the business case that they are better at producing these electric vehicles, better at producing quality vehicles, because, at the end of the day, the EV adoption rates have proven, the consumer is king. The consumer is going to drive this. Yeah. So if Ford, GM makes a better car than a Chinese fast-rising startup, well, then the consumer is going to decide that. So obviously policy is important in this, but what can't be lost in that is the fact that companies have to look within themselves as well.
And speaking of EVs and all the transitions there, one thing that also is coming up in some of my conversations with suppliers specifically is with the sort of cooling of demand for EVs, which, still growing but far slower than before. A lot of automakers are changing their EV plans and their product plans, which is a big deal for suppliers who made their own plans. They're also being asked to reduce their own costs and their own prices and things like that. I think that's going to be a really interesting thread to watch in the next several months, maybe even the next couple of years, with automakers like Ford saying, "Hey, suppliers, we're going to need you to help us out here with this transition," which is really not a decision that you made in any way.
Yeah, that's a big conflict that is ongoing within the supply base, and that's certainly something to watch. You mentioned Ford reaching out to its suppliers, asking for these cost reductions. Many of those suppliers were, on the other end, asking Ford, hey, help us with the inflationary costs that we ate for you these past 3 years when you had record profits, even though volumes weren't, as high as they are now. that conversation is continuing. We saw with Stellantis, it spilled over into litigation with suppliers. That's not over yet. We're going to see more of that. And certainly we'll be interested to see how it all shakes out, and we'll be reporting on it and trying to keep up with it. But yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. That's going to be a key theme in the coming months.
Yep. Anything else that you want to get in before we end the conversation today?
No, I think we about covered it here at the Mackinac Policy Conference, where legislators are going to solve the world's problems here in 3 days, so we should be good, right?
Yeah, there you go. Every year, you just have to hit the reset button on Mackinac. Kurt Nagel with Crane's Detroit Business, our sibling publication in the Crane Communications umbrella. Thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Drive.
Thank you for having me, Jake.
Enjoy the fudge.
I will do that.
That's all for this Weekend Drive edition of Daily Drive. I'm Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. You can get the latest news on suppliers, automaker executive shakeups, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back on Monday for a conversation with Arjun Narang, co-founder and chief technology officer with self-driving truck company Gatik. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. If you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.